All righty. Well, I guess it is officially afternoon, so good afternoon, and welcome to the Tampa Bay History Center's Florida Conversations. My name is Rodney Kite-Powell, and I am the director of the Touched and Map Library here at the History Center, and it is always a pleasure to be part of our Florida Conversations program. Just real quick, I do want to read this bit here. Welcome to Tampa Bay History's signature lecture series, Florida Conversations. This program is free and open to the public, thanks to the generous support of the University of South Florida Endowment, USF Libraries, AARP Tampa Bay, and a generous gift from Shelley Blood. We thank them for helping us bring meaningful conversations, history, and community engagement to Tampa Bay. And in addition to the lovely folks that we have here in person, this program is going out live on the internet, and it will be available for watching later. So for those of you who are in the room, of course you all are live here, and for those who are watching live, we definitely will want to ask you all to engage in the conversation as well. So if you have questions you want to bring up, that would be wonderful. For those of you who are here, just of course raise your hand. And for those who are watching live on the internet, just use the chat feature on whatever you're watching this on, and we will make sure we get to your question. So currently at the History Center, we have a temporary exhibit that is here from the State Museum in Tallahassee, and is called The Lure of Florida Fishing. And it's an overview, an overall fishing history of fishing in Florida, mostly from the recreational perspective. You know, of course, there is a lot of commercial fishing and commercial fishing history, and then there's the recreational side. And it's that recreational side that our panel today will be covering more in depth. We're going to also touch on a lot of things that relate to that as well. So to introduce the panel, and I'm going to have them tell a little bit more about themselves, but to my immediate left is Zach Sturm. To his left is Gray Burtchaell. Burtchaell. How do you get Burtchaell out of that?
Could have been 7 letters.
I know. And then to his left is Saxon Graham. And so Zach and Gray, they actually have a show on 102.5 The Bone, Tampa Offshore Fishing, and they will provide a lot of insights with that. And then Saxon actually works for one of the Tampa Bay area's most iconic outdoor sporting goods store, Bill Jackson's Shop for Adventure. And so a lot of great topics to talk about. And so just real briefly, though, I'd like for the three of you all just to tell the audience a little more about yourselves. So Zach, let's start with you.
We have a mic check on here. Excellent. My name is Captain Zach Sturm. I am a lifelong angler, started at a very young age, as I'm sure many of you have that are fishing recreationally. It was probably one of the most enjoyable hobbies that I can remember from my earliest memories. And I decided to continue to try to roll the dice and do that as a career. Fortunately, it's worked out, and I have the opportunity to work not only with so many wonderful fishermen in the fishing community, but throughout our work, serving on the board of directors of the Old Salt Fishing Foundation. Myself and Gray Burtchaell, my co-host, are able to do, we're able to gain outreach that we never before thought possible. And we look for ways to continue to better the community, and at the same time work towards conserving the fisheries so that for the next generations, they might have the opportunities that I myself have had. And we're very, very happy to be here to talk with you all this afternoon. Please, any questions, let me know.
Hi, I'm Gray Burtchaell. Not a captain, but I've very similar situation. I grew up fishing, started freshwater fishing in Jacksonville as a kid, so a lot of bass fishing, and then every vacation we ever took, we kind of centered around offshore fishing. And so when I moved here to Tampa in 2012, just really got into it more down here and learned a lot about the fishery, really just by latching on to people that knew a lot about fishing quickly. That's one of the easiest ways to learn anything. But it's been a lifelong passion of mine, and it's kind of strange, but it was really more my mom that got me into offshore fishing than it was my dad. My dad doesn't like to go offshore; he just wants to bass fish. So really got into that. But I'm also, grateful to be here and grateful to, hopefully impart some knowledge with y'all and maybe gain something back as well. So, your turn, Saxon.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. Are we good? Okay, cool. Well, good morning, or afternoon, I should say. Like our moderator mentioned, my name is Saxon Graham. Like a lot of people here, especially this time of year, I'm actually a non-native Floridian, so I was born and raised in Buffalo. So go Bills. Sorry about Sunday. But for me, and why I'm lucky enough to be here, and I wanted to thank the History Center and my panelists for taking part in this. Fishing has always been in my life, literally for the better part of 30 years, which is crazy to say since I'm only 34. But to me, it's been a lifelong thing for me. Started when I was about 6 years old. My dad, it was actually the guy who taught me everything I know, and I'm lucky and blessed to have him be in the audience today. But he taught me everything that I know. So from when I was growing up, it was mostly bass ponds behind our house, and we actually have a decent freshwater fishery back home, so we do have some freshwater trout as well. And then it kind of grew from there, my passion for it. I'm lucky enough to be able to take a couple destination trips every year with my dad and with my family members, so I've been lucky to fish all over the country, both fresh and saltwater. So for me, about a year and a half ago, I was kind of at a corporate or career crossroads, if you will, where I was working in a big IT firm in Clearwater called TD Synex. And I was there for about 6 years, and for me, I went to USF for grad school. I went to University of Buffalo for undergrad, both in a business setting. And so for me, I was kind of at a point in my life where I was good at the work I was doing, but it really didn't get me up every day and be excited about going in. And I was lucky enough for fishing to be that thing that keeps me going. So I talked it over with friends, talked it over with family, and I basically thought, if I'm not going to do this now, I'm never going to do it. So I was lucky enough, Bill Jackson's had an opening in their fishing department. Been there for about a year and a half, learned a ton about Tampa, about the history of fishing in Tampa, and all the stuff that this community has to offer in that regard. So very lucky, very blessed, like I said, to be here. And again, thank you to the History Center and my panelists for being here, and looking forward to talking to you guys. So thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, guys. And actually, we'll just stay with you, Saxon, as the, not to single you out, but as the only non-Floridian.
That's okay.
Up here. You obviously had to adjust a bit from how you were fishing up north to how you're fishing down here. And also, and this may have been part of the adjustment, you have a passion for fly fishing. Mm-hmm. And obviously there's fly fishing opportunities here in Florida, both salt and freshwater. Mm-hmm. But talk a little bit about that experience, that transition from northern fishing. Obviously there's no ice fishing here, but also, fly fishing versus either, casting or spinning reel fishing.
Yeah, sure. So the one thing that I love about this area, which this has a competitive advantage over a lot of other places in the country, is that you can do fish here year-round. So the fact that there's very little climate change, it's a very temperate, very mild climate all year, it gives you more opportunities than, say, for example, where I grew up in Buffalo. And like you said, fly fishing is my passion. That's what I love to do. That's what my dad taught me when I was younger. And it was a transition, not necessarily in terms of the techniques, but almost in the way that you approach fishing and fly fishing, because the majority of fly fishing you do down here is going to be inshore saltwater. And interestingly, fly fishing in saltwater, at least in the U.S., only started about a half century ago. So it's very, very new compared to traditional freshwater trout fishing or things along those lines. And so the transition was more about just trying how to approach a day out of fishing as opposed to the actual techniques themselves, because they are very similar. What I tell people when they come into the store and they say, for example, well, how big of a fish can you catch on fly gear? I tell them anything under 300 pounds you can target with the fly rod. Even when you go above that, even the heaviest tackle can't deal with it. Ironically, the world record caught on a fly rod was actually caught in Delray Beach, Florida in 2008. It was a 384-pound lemon shark, believe it or not. So even the heaviest tackle can handle something like that when somebody puts their mind to it. But I think, at least for inshore, and these guys know a lot more about offshore fishing than I do, inshore, I would argue, is more about the actual hunting of fish as opposed to actual fishing. Because with freshwater, where I love to fish, like in the rivers of Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah. Those rivers, it's almost about reading the water, where if you look at a body of water, if you look at a river or stream, and if you've been doing it long enough, you can kind of pick out the areas where a fish should be. And if the river has a good population of fish, 9 times out of 10, one will be there. With inshore saltwater, especially here, you can't do that because literally everything on top of the water looks exactly the same. So it's experience and time in picking those places. And again, the vast majority of the time, you're sight fishing for fish. You're not fishing a body of water, you're fishing for fish. So it's actually picking out the fish, make sure it's facing the right way, make sure it's swimming the right way, and then presenting your fly to the fish in that case. So probably the biggest transition for me was just trying to get used to that different approach, but I will say saltwater fishing can be that much more rewarding when you put all that effort in, then you finally land a fish. So that is one thing that I say that saltwater fly fishing has on freshwater fishing for sure.
That's fantastic. And so going to you, Greg, because you also, a little bit of a contrast, you grew up freshwater fishing, Florida lakes, a lot of bass fishing, probably a lot of, panfish. And then now looking at offshore, obviously there's some differences that are more obvious, but what are some of the less obvious differences in those methods of fishing? And really, the biggest question is, you said your dad has one preference, but what's your preference?
I prefer to fish offshore. I mean, honestly, if I could pull them up and the fillets were already taken off of them, if I just bring the fillets up, I'd do that. But no, in all seriousness, it is going to come down to presentation, whether you're fishing the bottom or you're fishing a fly. Those things do matter, and we do have discussions, arguments, whatever you want to call it, on the boat about, what size leader to use. If we're going to be fishing for snapper versus grouper, we're going to have conversations about, are we getting bites on, a frozen bait or a pinfish or a squid, or something along those lines. And then also, what you might find as, on a, like a flat line, which would be like a, a suspended bait behind the boat. The pelagics that we see sometimes, anywhere from a coastal pelagic, like a kingfish or a cobia, to, a true offshore pelagic, like a mahi or a, tuna or wahoo. So there's a lot of, one of the things that I'd say that I really enjoy about the offshore side of it, and I do prefer the offshore side, is the variety. And I do like to eat fish. I like to harvest fish. So for me, if I can come home with good fish to eat and have enough to, make dinner and maybe have a little bit to give away, that's always a lot of fun for me. And when it comes to subtle differences, I would say, you really could take a bass lure out offshore and catch a fish with it. It really, that's one of the things that's kind of funny about offshore fishing is you never know what something's going to eat out there. Because in some areas are like a desert, and then you have, areas where the fish are highly congregated, just like here. You have cities like where you'd have a lot of structure and hard bottom, and then you have sandy areas where there's not a whole lot going on. So in those areas where there's a lot of competition for those fish to eat, and a lot of times if the mood is right, they'll eat almost anything. So you could bring bass tackle if you wanted to, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. See what happens.
And so it's funny, your answer, and I have the same feeling. So you don't eat bass, freshwater bass?
I have. It's been a very long time since I've eaten a bass. I'm going to probably not be well received on this, but we caught a 12-pound largemouth bass when I was a kid, and he sure was good. We had him with some lemon and some butter on him, and but that was also, it was Jacksonville, and it was probably 1991. It was kind of a different mentality than it is now. But he was big enough that, you could open up his jaws and my dad could take both his hands and put it into his mouth. So it was a impressive fish. And, in hindsight, we probably should have let her go. But right now she might be passed away anyway,
well, exactly.
So,
come on.
but yeah, I don't know how long they live, but, probably not 40 years.
Not another 24 years or 34 years. So Zach, you're a fishing captain, you're a charter captain, and so again, there's a lot of obvious differences, but fishing for fun versus kind of fishing for work. You talk about that contrast.
So, being a charter captain, if you will, is something that I started in the industry as. I would like to say, unfortunately, but fortunately, I no longer do charters. But one of the things that I've certainly retained from when I used to be a captain that would take people out and fish, sometimes like any other job, you have difficult days and you have days that are just stellar. And one thing that I've noticed is the one thing they all have in common is when you look back on that entire year, you have the opportunity to take people that otherwise are not usually on the water as much as you, and you give them that opportunity to get out there, maybe catch that bucket list fish that they want, show them the technical aspects. One gentleman that a lot of you may know, one of my mentors that has been an absolute, just a rock star in the industry, Captain C.A. Richardson. I got a lot of great advice from him, and he is probably the most brilliant, educated, when it comes to education of anglers of all ages, freshwater, saltwater. A lot of the methods that we use to capture these fish and hunt these fish and seek them out can be used from freshwater to saltwater, inshore estuary fishing to offshore, coastal fishing and beyond. And that gentleman really, he took the approach of teaching his clients how to do what he does. And now he still does a few charters here and there for folks lucky enough to get the opportunity. But mainly, he has what's called Flats Class University, and he teaches people all kinds of wonderful methods. And I must say that one of the most rewarding things from being a charter captain was the ability to teach people how to reproduce the same results themselves. It may sound like it's counterproductive to being a for-hire fishing guide. If you're going to teach somebody how to, mine their own gold, what are they going to do? It was never about that for me. It was about making sure that the folks that are taking their time to go on the boat with me leave with something. And sometimes that may just be fish fillets and, mild sunburn, or it may be a lifelong passion for a hobby that even to this day, I try to, really further through the work that we do in the community, whether it be philanthropically through Old Salts and our other organizations that we partner with. But if I had one goal from being a fishing captain and being a fishing personality, it would be to further fishing for the youth and make sure that those kids have an opportunity to really understand that this simple little hobby can not only teach you some of the most important lessons in life, but it can keep you out of trouble, and it can get you really in circles with some of the most amazing, wonderful people that one could imagine. And so that's the type of work I try to do at present. It is just rewarding and very, very thankful to have the opportunity to have done so.
Fantastic. So Saxon, we'll go back to you and kind of taking a step back and looking at kind of Florida fishing in a broader sense. How many different types of places can people go to fish? And then what's the kind of the minimum amount of tackle that they would need to accomplish that? So, again, kind of the whole broad spectrum of Florida fishing, not like spear fishing, but, rod and reel or lure fishing or bait fishing. But, what are the kind of basics that they would need to do that, and where can they do that?
Yeah, sure. So, like I mentioned earlier, the one thing that I would say that Florida has on pretty much every other state outside of maybe Southern California, maybe the bottom of Texas, is the fact that we have a year-round fishery here, both for fresh and saltwater, which very, very, very few places on earth, frankly, can say. So we have a great competitive advantage in terms of being able to get people out onto the water. So for Bill Jackson's as an example, somebody can come in. You were talking about, Zach, about bringing kids out and having that experience, and that's how I started, as a perfect example. In reality, if you wanted to come to us and just say, hey, I have a 5-year-old son, 5-year-old daughter, I want to take him out fishing, what do I need? Literally, all we would do is we would give you a rod with some line and a reel, and then maybe one or two little baits or 1 or 2 little hooks to go. And then, honestly, how I started and how I got into it is I just use worms. I use night crawlers. So, and every single bait shop around here is going to have something like that. So, the barrier to entry is very, in terms of business language, the barrier to entry is extremely small, but the rewards are very, very high in terms of being able to do that. So, I would say, it differs with fly fishing a little bit, but there are still some low-cost options to do that. I think there's a I don't want to say a misnomer, but a belief that fly fishing has, a much higher barrier to entry compared to spin fishing. It can in certain ways, just in terms of the cost of the items, where you go, how you fish. But in terms of just going out there and enjoying the outdoors and enjoying yourself and spending time with family, it's very, very similar. So I would say it's here specifically in the Tampa Bay area, it's very, very easy to do. Literally, and even like outside, right by the History Center, we have a dock. I guarantee there are fish literally sitting under that dock right now. So possibilities are endless, and there are a lot of different opportunities where you can do that. So.
Fantastic.
Does that answer your question?
That absolutely does.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
I'm on the right track. That's good.
Yeah, no, totally. We've actually gone, I don't know how far into this conversation, 23 minutes, and we haven't talked really about tarpon. Tarpon fishing is something from Florida's historical kind of fishing standpoint, recreational fishing in particular. It's one of the first fish that people came to Florida purposefully to fish for. And so I'll direct this question at you, Gray, but you can defer if you want, or y'all can kind of all join in. How has tarpon fishing kind of changed over the years, from a method standpoint, but also from an ethical standpoint? Thinking about the early tarpon tournaments, where you're all too young to have participated in them, but pictures of them, there's basically just lots and lots of dead tarpon. But also just the fishing methods and just the intensity that fishery can get.
Well, one of the greatest things that ever happened to a tarpon is a camera, because if you look at these older pictures, and now that cameras are in everybody's hand all the time, you don't have to prove to someone by sticking it on a spike at your local marina that you caught it. And for me, I think that's a great thing, because I know that tarpon were fished, way down in numbers to a point where they were concerned about the population. But I would say, as far as the actual tarpon fishing itself, we've had several people on our show that help run the Tarpon Roundup, which is, I believe it's the oldest fishing tournament in Florida, if not maybe the country. Dave Travis, so he's been involved in tarpon fishing for a very long time, his whole life, and I don't know exactly how old he is. I know he's older than me, but sorry, Dave. But he talks about the traditions that still remain, and some of the tackle that they use sometimes just for the novelty of it, where you have, instead of using a reel that actually has drag, they have the leather strap on it that you actually hold your thumb down and use that to create resistance on the fish. Some of the methods are still very similar, because the tarpon doesn't know what year it is. So they don't know what the new technology is in the fishing industry. So they still like white bait. They still like, still like chum. They still like, all that kind of stuff that would be natural for them to eat. A shrimp, anything that's, that's something that would be, going by in the tide. But yeah, I think it's great that we've had the camera really preserve what's gone on with tarpon, because they're a great resource. And one of the biggest things that we always want to try to shine light on is how important fishing is to the state of Florida economically, right? And so if we got to be known for killing all the tarpon in the state of Florida, it might be bad for tourism and things like that as well. Yeah, so that's a big point. But yeah, I would say those would be, the biggest things about it is, thank God for the camera, and honestly, it's great we have regulation, because the last point I'll make about a tarpon is, has anybody in this room ever eaten a tarpon? Right? So then why would you kill one? Right? Because they're not good to eat. Right? So there's no reason to harvest them.
Is the fishery healthy right now?
Very, yes, very. You can go out to areas, especially during the summer, basically late April through October, and you will find tarpon all over our beaches, Anna Maria Island, Bunce's Pass, all the way up to, obviously north of Tarpon Springs, those areas, and then of course all the way down, around the entire state until you get, maybe Daytona. Yeah, juvenile tarpon stay in the estuaries up here, and they're typically more of a local fish that will stay in that estuary until they mature enough to work their way out to the beach and then migrate from there. But sometimes you have resident fish that just stick around. But yes, the population's very healthy with tarpon. But nobody's harvested one in probably 40 years, I would imagine. Yeah. So no reason to. There's just stick it on a spike and take a picture. Just take one in the water. It doesn't matter.
There was a spot right here on Bayshore, and anybody has kids here, remember, you come down here in the 50s and stuff, and there'd be all these tarpon hanging up.
Yeah.
And even as a kid, I used to think, what a waste.
Yeah, what are you going to do with them? I agree with fishing regulation. I don't agree with overreach, but I do agree with fishing regulation. And I think that, with any fish that's got no food value, you really should never harvest it. There's just no point.
Yeah, and from a fly fishing perspective, and I can join in. For the people who are watching on Zoom, the original question was how is the tarpon population currently, and then along with that, a gentleman shared a story about in the 50s where you literally saw hundreds of tarpon being lined up on a spike, basically, and how that's changed the culture. For fly fishing specifically, the main draw for tarpon is basically late April through late July around here, when they're actually migrating up. So tarpon themselves are a fascinating fish, along with being arguably the greatest sport fish in the world. Their biology and just what they do throughout the year is pretty interesting. So during that time of the year, the vast majority, I would say the largest population of resident tarpon in the world are probably going to be in the Florida Keys area, right where the Gulf of Mexico meets the Atlantic Ocean, right in that area. During that time of year, they actually come up the coast to spawn. And what they'll do is they'll go up the beach, maybe anywhere from a few hundred yards to a few miles offshore. They'll actually travel up north, in this case, and then at a certain point, they'll make a hard left turn due west, and then they'll spawn in the Gulf at about anywhere from 200 to 1,000 feet of water. Very, very interesting in how they do that. And then some of them, once they're done spawning, they'll either take a left, head east, and then stay basically in the area where they turned left, or they will go back to the Keys. So for us, at least at Bill Jackson's, the main draw is late April through late July is when we see a ton of tarpon fishermen come in and try to target those fish. And for them in general, and the population has gotten strong, like you said, because of the conservation that they've done. But just in general, they're called the Silver King for a reason. They probably are the best sport fish in the world. They will literally, if you could paint a picture about what a fish will do on your line and just what the mecca of that would be, that's a tarpon. They are very, very big, very fast, very strong. To put an example, in fly fishing, tarpon fishing isn't measured by how many fish you land, it's how many fish you hook. Because 9 times out of 10, they will break off. And we have a mount of a tarpon above our fishing area in our store, which is about 120 pound fish. That's about an average size for the ones that migrate, but you can get some over 200 pounds, literally as big as me. And the last time I went tarpon fishing a couple of years ago, I actually had one within probably 30 feet of our boat bump a fly, and it was literally a 180 pound female. And to see something that giant, literally 7 feet long, take a fly that's literally no less than 2 inches, and to have that literally right in front of me, it was something I will never forget. And it's a very, very powerful image in my brain that'll stick. And so for them, for a lot of people, and for a lot of saltwater fishermen, it is the Silver King. It is the main sport fish to target, at least down here for fly fishing.
Yeah, they really are. They're pretty amazing creatures. I'm gonna have one more question for Zach before I open it up to some audience questions, and it kind of follows along with what we're talking about. And again, as this gentleman said in the front row, there are pictures from the Tampa Tarpon tournaments, and the little structure is still there on Bayshore in Hyde Park, where it was a kill tournament, because they all were kill tournaments, because that's just the way it was. But they were so successful, combined with the fact that we were literally pumping sewage right into our bay and killing the seagrass, that those tournaments were no longer successful because the tarpon were gone. But in that's the 50s and early 60s. But in the past 60 years, there has been a tremendous amount of conservation efforts. And so, Zach, I want to direct this to you. It's obvious, again, it's an obvious question, the importance of conservation. But what are some of the most important keys that maybe people don't understand, whether it's bag limits or it's seagrass, it's props, not running your prop through 3 inches of water because you're scarring up the landscape. What are some of those things that people may not think about as much, and the most important ones?
Well, this may be an unpopular thing to say as we sit in beautiful downtown Tampa. However, one of the biggest things that we face is our municipalities and the constant dumping of wastewater, sewage, etc. Whatever the reasoning may be, I certainly understand they have to do it, but the infrastructure needs to be fixed in Tampa and St. Pete. If not, all of the other stuff that we could talk about really is not going to add up to much. Now, when we face the major problems, which I think it would be very good of the cities to address those, because nothing else is worth addressing if we don't take care of those items. And I have to say that organizations such as Water Warrior Alliance, I serve on the board of directors there, Tampa Bay Waterkeeper, organizations such as those, they have the ability to bring awareness, they have the ability to take action. However, they are limited by not only the volunteers that are a part of them, but also the donors that allow for those actions to be funded. Now, when it comes to the smaller things that we can take care of on a personal level, I'd say that the seagrass was a very important thing, because as many of you know, seagrass is a very important part of the ecosystem in our estuary. In order to catch a good amount of, say, spotted sea trout, you're going to want to find a nice area of turtle grass, usually. Sometimes manatee grass, sometimes other areas, but the seagrass is extremely important. And one thing that we have around Tampa Bay, we have many no internal combustion areas, which serve two purposes. Usually, one, it'll take care of the manatees, they're very large, beautiful creatures, but they are not going to keep up with Suzuki outboard that is, going on full plane 35 miles an hour. Any outboard engine has the, ability to harm those fish and sometimes, kill them. But also the props, you don't want to kind of drag up the seagrass, because that seagrass takes a substantial amount of time in order to grow. And prop scars are what we call them. You may notice, if any of you are boaters in the Tampa Bay area, you may see a beautiful seagrass mat on a shallow flat, and you see a big long sand area through that. Well, that was the result of a propeller on an outboard motor that was cutting all that grass up. And so we always say the easiest thing a person can do is, go a little bit slower and trim up. And it really helps you as a fisherman, because you are not going to be able to see the fish that you're going to want to stalk with a motor running. One thing that we talk about, Tampa Bay is, I assume, the area that many of you are fishing. Tampa Bay is one of the highly pressured fisheries in the world. And what I mean by pressured, now, for example, if you were to go to Crystal River, Yankeetown, etc., you are going to be able to catch redfish very easily. We're talking throw a popping cork out, throw a shrimp on it, throw whatever out. They're going to smoke it, and you're going to be, boom, looking at an absolutely amazing fish. Now, in Tampa Bay, you have to look at the methods that you would stalk these fish, and a lot of times, the most successful anglers are using what we call a push pole, which it's just as easy as you would think. And a lot of times you'll have folks like Saxton and the folks that Bill Jackson's taking care of with fly. They are stalking those fish in very skinny water. Usually to catch a good redfish, you're going to want to be at about a foot of water anyway. You're able to push and you're able to see those fish, and especially if you're fly fishing or fishing an artificial bait, etc., sight casting that fish is going to be extremely important to that process. So you're going to want to make sure that your entrance to finding those fish is as quiet as possible. Another thing I was taught a long time ago, in Tampa Bay, the longer your cast, the better chance you have, because every single boat, the fish have a lateral line. And that lateral line is able to detect disturbances and vibrations. And even your boat and the way that the boat displaces the water and the hull slap that you may have with the, you know, if you're going by, plop, 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 you probably heard the sound. The whir of an electric trolling motor. All of those things can affect the fish's desire to eat that day. And some days, nobody cares. You're out there, you got Leonard Skinner blaring, you got people slamming the live well and everything, and you're still just tearing the fish up. However, in somewhere like Tampa Bay, you have to also realize on the right day, you're going to end up in a situation where you have to approach that fish with the utmost care if you want to have a successful day on the water. And so those prop scars, again, those are the result of people going way faster than they should. And I would say that to really wrap up my thought on this, it would be making sure that we do our best to keep wind-driven debris, which is one of the biggest polluters that we possibly have in the Tampa Bay area, and in fact all of Florida. And that's just your stuff, any type of trash. The wind blows this stuff into the waterways, and that then ends up being the nasty stuff that you see. And we do a lot of, Gray and I work very hard with Old Salt Fishing Foundation. We partner with the city of Madeira Beach and many other partners. We'll go around and we go out on boats. We were just out on our friend Brent Mogsig's boats from Mastery Engine Center. And we were having a great time picking up all kinds of just garbage that it always ends up in the mangroves and the mangrove roots and all over the oyster bars, and you really have to get up in there, and those cleanups are imperative. So if you ever are, again, volunteer for something like that, we could absolutely point you in the right direction. Sponsor events like that. Those are the things that you can do on a local level to truly make an impact, because every bit of that trash that's cleaned up, and we're fortunate that we literally have tons of trash that we remove from Tampa Bay every year. That's a very important part of it. And again, if everyone tries to do their best, on an individual level, that can absolutely make a difference. But for the most part, we definitely need to get citizens involved with making sure that on a larger industrial scale, that we don't have the mass pollution from poor infrastructure and mismanagement and lack of oversight in our municipalities. So that would be my thought on that. Gray, you have a thought?
I do have a point on that. You asked about regulation also, and we all want to be able to sustain the fishery and be able to keep fish, right? Or at least most of us in this room. And for me, I think we run into a little bit of almost like a conflict when it comes to the way that some of these sewer systems are managed and the acceleration it does to things like red tide and things like that cause fish kills. And then at the same time, we're taking fish away from people that we may have been able to have easier regulations if the fish weren't killed as a result of bad management of the wastewater. So it's not always the angler that's, I don't want people to say this is my excuse to kill more fish than I'm supposed to. That's not the point. My point is, that if these wastewater situations were managed a little better, I think we'd be in a situation where we could also have a little bit more relaxed fishing regulations. And I also think that we would also have an easier time targeting some of the, especially the inshore species. Because, we have had years in the past and not too long ago where we've had, fish kills, up and down the beaches, up and down the bay, all over the place, and, it's really a sad sight. So I think, that's going to be a big step in helping with taking the pressure off of the implementation of regulations. If the water quality is better, then you don't need as many regulations, right?
Exactly.
I think it's...
Go ahead.
No.
Go ahead, Saxon.
Oh, okay, no. I was just going to quickly add, just do your part. I think that's the moral of the story here. I think if everybody does their part in a certain way to keep this ecosystem healthy, then I think we'll be in a good spot. Just as a random example that I personally do. So in my apartment complex by Bill Jackson's in Pinellas Park, we don't have a recycle bin. So what I actually end up doing is I take the recycling every week or two, and I actually go behind Publix in Clearwater, believe it or not. They have a communal recycle bin, one of the industrial size ones, and I dump all my recycling there. Now, I could throw all that stuff in the trash and make it a lot easier, but I understand that, it's a small thing, but it's still, in my opinion, doing my part to keep the natural environment as best as I can with the capabilities that I have, right? So if everybody does their part, long story short, I think we'll be in a good situation, and then everything will lead from that.
Absolutely, and if I'll add one more thing to wrap this up, one of the most important parts about this, one thing that we've touched on a lot, is obviously the awareness, raising the awareness, amongst yourselves, the hobbyists, the folks that are interested in this, but most importantly, when you figure out, hey, this is how I can help out with this situation, this is how I can give back. You also have to look at, again, the youth come into this very, very, very much so, because we have the opportunity to really teach the youth, hey, this is the best way to go about this. Here, clean up after yourself. Make sure that you don't keep too many fish if you don't need to. Teach them about the intricacies, because we could go on about, when it comes to the conservation side, there are a lot of ways that a fish population can decrease. We've run into issues with Goliath grouper, for example. Mismanagement can happen in fisheries. Sharks, Goliath grouper, depredation is another thing that happens, where you have anglers that are trying to catch a fish, and the sharks are going to eat more than the anglers are, so it's not really an angler issue. Or you may have, obviously, a red tide that's caused from the amount of nitrates in the water and all the runoff and everything and the poorly managed infrastructure there. There are so many different facets to it. But I think awareness is really the thing that's going to outlive all of us, if you will. We've worked really hard. People make fun of my my fancy green hat here. It's a local company out of Clearwater, lithium battery power. They're absolutely obsessed with teaching the youth the right way to do things. Their contributions to conservation and youth fishing have been absolutely amazing. They're a great partner of ours, good friends of mine, and really teaching the youth the next steps and how to be a proper steward of this estuary, of the fishery. I think that that's going to be our best bet, because our time is always going to be finite. And I certainly think it's best to pass on the knowledge and wisdom that we have collectively gained in order to make sure that they can help generations to come. And yeah, very, very broad topic, but thank you for the question.
Yeah. No, it's we thank you all for the answer. It's something that I think we take for granted here, but the Tampa Bay estuary is one of the largest estuaries, not just in the country, but in the world. And Zach, to your point, if the municipalities that operate around that estuary don't do their part in keeping some of the worst stuff out of it, and again, it used to be unintentional, but it was intentional to not fix the fact that our sewage used to deliberately go into the bay. That doesn't happen now, but it happens by accident far, far too often. So that's a great point. And I will say the city of Tampa has done one thing where they have this neat little boat called the Little Skimmer. and it travels around the river and the channels here, literally skimming up the floating debris that is blown off of boats, or the runoff. And that's one thing we didn't talk about at all, is just how much runoff there is, not just in trash, but in pollutants, fertilizers and things like that, that we can all do our part by not putting them on the ground to begin with. So I want to make sure that you all have an opportunity to take part before we end up. And so, again, we've got folks that are listening online. They may have a question. We also have you all here in the audience. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and young Ryan here will run to you and bring you the microphone. Please wait until you have the microphone to ask your question.
Hello, I really appreciate the talks you've been giving. It's been a little over a year since this area got sideswiped by two pretty intense hurricanes. And so I'm wondering, in the aftermath, if you could talk about what impacts it's had on the fishing and if you feel it's recovered by now.
I would say it's kind of interesting, but right after we get a hurricane, sometimes the fishing is really, really good. I know that sounds crazy, but especially if you went out, and a lot of people didn't because the damage was so bad, but if you have a hurricane that comes by and doesn't do any damage, you get an opportunity to fish right after. The fishing is very good, and it's because it moves everything around, and the fish also had to use a lot of energy to stay, close by where they were, and alive, probably, yeah. So, but as far as the actual, what it's done to the fishing in the area, I would say the fishing has been pretty stable. One of the things that we have seen, though, is we've seen a little less fishing pressure because we had so many people with damaged boats. We had so many people reshift their focus into getting back into their homes, and they didn't really have time to fish. Whereas, you go back to post or during COVID and slightly after COVID, you had this this almost like the Burtchaell boat lift. I mean, everybody bought a boat on the planet, and it was totally crazy. And then there was so much fishing pressure, and I think that the hurricane sort of backed a lot of that off, and you've seen some fishing actually come back. That was maybe a little bit too pressured. Sometimes it's not. You wouldn't say overfished, but you would say that the pressure's so strong that the fish get smart. So that would be what I'd say about it.
To touch on that, we obviously with Hurricanes Helene and Milton, the effects of those two storms combined, which a lot of folks did not truly think that it would be the threat that it turned out. It's been devastating. We've had the opportunity to work with many of our local leaders on different items. And one thing I'll certainly say is, anyone here from Pinellas County by chance? So one thing to certainly consider, we were just on our show the other day, we had our friend County Commissioner Vince Nowicki from Pinellas County, and he was reminding people that there is HUD money that came from the federal government, about $800 million worth, and it can award people, even if they've already paid, up to about $375,000 per household to help cover some of those expenses if you had to get a new roof, if you had to. And we learned a lot about this. A lot of people just know Gray for being the guy that plays golf and fishes a lot and talks on the radio. But Gray owns a very successful residential and commercial roofing and solar company. And so he has the ability to really get involved with a lot of these parts of the process. But to say the least, I'm very happy with the work that the entire Pinellas County Commission has done. Vince Nowicki, Chris Shearer, good friends of ours, they've worked with their colleagues to make sure that their constituents can get access to that money. And we can certainly point anybody in the right direction. But yes, thank you, Gray. Recover.pinellas.gov. For those of you that are watching on the internet, and certainly if anyone needs that, we can get you that after the panel. But to your point, it was very difficult on people. You had folks that were recreational, and they lost their homes, they lost their businesses, and obviously insurance is not going to be a snap of the finger and you're going to be indemnified and made whole, even though that's kind of what we pay insurance premiums for. That's not always the case. And there was a lot that we worked with Salty Dog Charters and a few other companies out of there too. They were doing everything from saving elderly folks from their homes in the flooding. We were over there at Bay Pines Bait and Tackle with Steve and everybody, and we were collecting food. Sarah Salt was another very influential woman that was helping us over in the Indian Rocks Beach area. We were collecting all kinds of stuff and supplies, thank you. Get kind of lost there. But this was before FEMA even got into the area. It was boots on the ground. And one thing that I would certainly say with the fishing community, they take care of their own and they take care of the community. And if I would say fishing was affected in any way, it tightened the camaraderie that truly makes fishing such a great community. You have people from all different walks of lives. This guy may have voted for this guy. This guy may like to eat this kind of meal. Every single person from all kind of walks of life, they can agree on fishing, and it's something that we treasure. And Helene and Milton certainly was a display of that. And the fishing is, as Gray was saying, without the obvious pressure, because you had less people, less effort, as we would call it, on a conservation side. Clearly the fish are going to rebound, but I certainly think you all will join me in saying that I hope that we never experience back-to-back storms like Helene and Milton, because I've been very impressed at the resolve of the citizens of Pinellas County with their recovery efforts over the last year, because for many of them, they lost everything, and unfortunately, when the news cycle ends, their struggles in their life still goes on. So thank you for bringing that up. That's wonderful.
And just to kind of, from my perspective, come full circle on this and talking about just how well the community has bounced back from those storms, just to give a Bill Jackson's perspective on this. So for me, being the day-to-day guy handling the operations of the fishing part of the business, it's, I'm always looking at how we're doing this month compared to last year, compared to 2 or 3 years, and how we're growing. So on that point, and just kind of bringing it home, this October, which is when obviously Helene and Milton came last October, not only did we have a great October compared to Milton, we had the best October we've ever had since before COVID. So that shows kind of how, with all the stuff that went on and all of the local communities grabbing together, and it also translated into investment in the community as well, with Bill Jackson's, with some of our competitors who we know very well, have a good relationship with. That showed in the investment in fishing, not in fishing, but just in Pinellas County in general when it comes to Bill Jackson. So speaking on that and just kind of bringing it full circle, I give 100% effort and 100% credit to the community and the Tampa Bay community, because without that, number one, I wouldn't have a job, so that really helps. But along with that, to have one of the best months we've had in literally over half a decade in October this year really speaks to the community and how well they've done and how well they've gathered themselves.
Fantastic. Do we have any more questions in the audience? Any looking back at the back of the room? Okay. You have?
You got one.
And then we can, and then I have one last question, the same question for
And
each
I've
of
got
you.
one. I've got one too for these guys.
Oh,
as well.
okay. We'll let you
Yeah.
go first. But
How does red tide affect the fishing? And it seems red tide. What causes red tide? And it seems it's decreased this year versus or last couple of years versus before.
So red tide it's a very good question. Thank you. Red tide is caused by an algae bloom that unfortunately, when we have warmer water and we have a combination, one of the biggest things, are you familiar with the Piney Point incident that we had over in Tampa Bay? So for an example, how that acts as a catalyst, when you have those nitrates and the runoff and the chemicals that are dumped into the waterways, it almost acts, it certainly acts as an accelerant, no different than if one were to pour gasoline on a campfire, and it just gets things out of hand. And how that affects, obviously, there are a few different ways that affects it. Obviously, we're removing fish from the population when they perish. And those fish have to go somewhere. So what that also does is you're looking at a very disgusting bay. It absolutely acts as our tourism angle, which we do a lot of work with Visit St. Pete Clearwater, and it's amazing the economic impact that the tourism has to our economy. And that's something that, I mean, we really look at, we have the luxury of living in Tampa Bay, beautiful area. Why do we enjoy it? Well, obviously we have our beautiful beaches, we have our beautiful waterways. If that is destroyed, what do we have? I mean, people aren't going to want to vacation here. They're not going to want to spend our money. And so it doesn't matter if you're the coffee shop on the corner or if you're a place like Bill Jackson's or Angler 360 that does tackle and bait or things like that, or a hotel. It's going to affect your bottom line. So it's so incredible that something is seemingly harmless is, oh, there's a lot of water in the bay. You're going to dump a little bit of this. Clearly, it's not going to, it does. And
they deny the relationship. They often deny the relationship between the nitrates being dumped in the bay and the acceleration of the K. brevis algae bloom. And so that's always a problem. You know, to then you have to prove that that was the cause, right? Because they act like it just comes out of nowhere. But the other thing that I see that's a really big impact is it kills almost all the bait, right? So all your forage fish, you know, your sardines and whatnot, they're all going to be dead. And that goes on until about 10 miles offshore. So even if you maybe were to find a spot that you were lucky to get bait at where they're still alive, where maybe the red tide hasn't been so bad, and then you run offshore with those baits and you're using a live well, then it kills all the bait in your live well when you're on the way.
So this is a very good point.
It's awful.
It was probably 9 years ago. I was fishing the Old Salt's King of the Beach in Madeira Beach, and we were all going out. We thought we'd have a great day of king fishing, hope to win a good one. We had red tide, and it was a very bad red tide. And that's a perfect example. We're talking about hundreds of dollars in bait that we were going to take offshore into the Gulf. And this strip of red tide, by the time and granted, we are running 35, 40 miles an hour on a big center console. Well, there's a clamshell pickup that essentially takes water as you're running and puts it through your live well, fresh water. Well, what that did is it picked up the red tide water and it killed the majority of our bait. We were out at the Blackthorn having to catch new. Now, we didn't win that kingfish tournament, but I can tell you what, in the process of catching bait, we ended up catching, I think, 8 hogfish, probably 12 yellowtail snapper, mangrove snapper. It was ridiculous. I mean, but in order to have a healthy fishery, we need to manage those algae blooms because obviously if you are a corporation that might allegedly be responsible for said algae bloom blowing up, of course you're not going to say, oh yeah, our bad. No, you're going to say, oh, the effect on this probably is overblown. No, cause and effect, when you harm the fishery from the forage fish, the baits, all the way up, the bay gets messy, that affects your tourism. People don't want to go out to your, you know, our Gulf beaches are some of the most beautiful in the country. You know, you go from St. Pete Beach all the way up to Clearwater. You have fish smell and, you know, just the nastiness. People do not want to enjoy time with their family. That is not a memory that is going to be pleasant.
Well, you followed up with a question, which was, yes, it is
Yes.
getting better, and that's what I was gonna shine light on. Is you know, when Governor DeSantis was originally running, you know, he came and toured the areas, Charlotte Harbor and Tampa Bay and things like that were having really bad red tide, and he also paid a lot of attention to Lake Okeechobee. And Lake Okeechobee is also another place that can accelerate red tide because you have, you know, they have a flow out of Lake Okeechobee for the sugar manufacturers that goes down into Florida Bay and then comes back up through the Keys and hits the loop current and comes up by us. And that's why you also see some of these problems with water quality all the way from the Keys to where we are. And he changed some of the regulations on that, and he's made sure that there's a lot less wastewater dumping out of Lake Okeechobee for the sugar manufacturers.
Are you good? Okay, so I was just going to, lastly, because these guys know much more about red tide than I do, but I will give credit to the FWC on just how on point they are with it, because at Bill Jackson's, we have a weekly email goes out from the Florida Water. Yeah, the Florida Wildlife Commission every Friday sends out throughout the entire year, not just in the winter months where it can get worse, but they send out a weekly periodical saying, hey, we did all these samples this week. Here where we have marginal concentration, here's where we have no concentration. Here is where we have a higher concentration of red tide. And they actually calculate that, and they do an entire map about it. So, and coming from New York, you know, a lot of our state-run programs are driven by state income tax. And for coming here, when out in 2012, obviously having no income tax in Florida is great, but also too the fact that it's amazing, and I commend them wholeheartedly that they do such a great job with not only protecting the fishery, but making people aware about what's going on in the fishery on a weekly basis. And for those people who are listening and for the people who are here, I actually brought some stuff from Bill Jackson's from FWC about their freshwater regulations, saltwater regulations, and then just a fishing map of Tampa Bay. And for those watching online, you can get those for free from the FWC website. So to make a long story short, they do a fantastic job, and I commend them for all their work.
All right, so Saxon, you said you had a question for Zach and Greg. Just really quickly.
Yeah.
And then I have one last question, which will be really quick for you all.
Yeah, sure. I'll make it brief, I promise, even though I've talked way too much today. So about depredation, because you guys were talking about, especially in the offshore community, like, for example, I think, Greg, you made the point that the majority of the time the sharks are going to catch more fish than you actually do, or maybe, was it Zach? Okay. Either way. So obviously, that's obviously a turn from people going out and wanting to spend money on a boat captain, going out and charter. What do you see going forward as a solution for that, if there is one? Yeah, of course.
Well, it's going to be a multi-step process, and recognizing the problem has been, first and foremost, the best way to get things rolling. A little bit about the history. Sharks have been protected for quite some time now. The finning of sharks was a very hard on the population. It got to the point where Goliath grouper were being overfished as well. Notice I say were. Well, the problem that they didn't really think about, both of those species are apex predators. They pretty much can eat anything. A Goliath grouper, we've seen them eat sharks all the time. They are not to be messed with. The problem runs into when you think of your reef, say your random reef that's 3 miles off the coast in the Gulf, you have all sorts of reef fish species, snappers, groupers, things of that nature. What I would see is the attractive fish that a person would want to target, whether it be recreationally or if they would come down and hire a captain or a charter. You want to catch grouper and snapper. I'm sure a lot of you enjoy a good snapper fillet, a good grouper sandwich at a lot of our wonderful establishments. Madeira Beach, Florida is the grouper capital of the world. A lot of folks don't realize that. A lot of the grouper that come in through the country come in through Johns Pass in beautiful Madeira Beach, Florida, and Treasure Island. We have to make sure that we are controlling those apex species, because what they're going to do, they don't say, oh, hey, guys, FWC told me that I can only keep this fish in this size.
Yeah,
or
sharks
this way.
don't have a bag limit.
They don't have a bag limit.
When they eat a fish, they just do whatever they want.
They're going to eat it. And the problem is you got a lot of people that their heads and their hearts were in the right place. They said, oh, we're going to protect this species, and we're going to do this and that. And they meant well. However, what they did is they made it so that the other species are then suffering with their population because this predator that pretty much can take care of itself has been protected to the point of overprotection. And this is why we have to be very, very careful with what we do regulation-wise, because regulations, it can get to the point of overreach, and it's something that we have to deal with. Our American red snapper population had to go through this with the federal government. The state, FWC, took over for the Gulf of Mexico Fisheries Management Council, as it was called at the time when this went down. And essentially, you had 3 days in June that you could harvest American red snapper at 2 per person. Well, the truth of that is, those days in June, maybe one of them was fishable, and a lot of times that's if you were on a 40-foot, $500,000+ center console. But for the most part, it was unobtainium to the majority of the public, the stakeholders. And that got to the point where FWC stepped in. I believe there was some help from Washington and the Secretary of Commerce, and they switched it over so it was a state-managed fishery. And they've just recently done the same thing with the Atlantic side, and it's working. And so overregulation is a very, very bad thing. It's a slippery slope. And I mean, the data is only as good as the ability to collect it. We joked on our show, there was a study that was done in regards to gag grouper. And according to whoever put the study out, that was soon thereafter pulled back in. I'm sure that person got a good tongue lashing there. But they essentially said that the folks at the Skyway Pier were harvesting how many pounds of grouper, Gray?
It was 108,000 pounds in 29 days. So it comes out to, gosh, I think it was like 300 fish per day were harvested off of the Skyway Pier gag grouper only. That would be if you averaged it at like a 5-pound fish. You know, so it's unreasonable to think that was possible. You know, what ends up happening in these type of situations is you end up with a lopsided fishery. You end up with predators at the top, and they have the ability to consume whatever they want. They consume the fish you're trying to catch. They also consume the fish that they eat on a daily basis. So, you know, it doesn't matter to them. But sharks used to be commercially harvested, and, you know, I think we should probably head back in that direction. But it's a long road to hoe, because we not only would have to go through NOAA, but it's also going to have to go through the highly migratory species part of the, you know, that's managed out of federal government. So it's, you know, it's one of those things where HMS is actually very proud of what's going on with sharks, but sharks are becoming a massive problem. So they think they've done the right thing, but what they've really created is a lopsided fishery. And there's, like you mentioned, red snapper before. Red snapper have taken over every piece of hard bottom rock structure, wreck, reef, everything you can think of. You know,
we're even seeing them in Tampa Bay.
Yeah, they're everywhere. And you know, the problem with a red snapper, and same thing's happening with gags, is a red snapper will eat a mangrove snapper, a red snapper will eat a yellowtail snapper, a red snapper will eat almost anything, right? Gag grouper are doing the same thing now because they've been overregulated with mangrove snapper at the Skyway. You can't catch mangrove snapper at the Skyway anymore because it's all gags, right? So this is what happens when we lopside the fishery and we say we're going to go ahead and let the predators do whatever they want, right? It doesn't work. It turns into a big problem.
One thing I'll add to that, Gray, that's a very good point. Thank you for bringing that up. When we bring up the Skyway Pier, we do a lot of work with a small group of folks over there called the Skyway Misfits. They become very popular on social media. If you ever scroll through Instagram or Facebook, a lot of times you'll see one of the videos of them catching a 400 or 500 pound Goliath grouper and then releasing it successfully from a pier. The one thing that we've certainly learned through working with them on several projects is the importance of the Skyway Pier, and the importance of that pier not only to the anglers that may not be able to financially justify the purchase of a boat or the purchase of a charter.
Is the bass pond for me.
Right.
Right. Like if you live in this area, that's where you start to fish. That's where fishing begins, because you're not going to take your 4-year-old kid offshore fishing, right? That's not safe. So that's why it's so important.
Well, the disabled as well. The
yeah.
disabled, a lot of times, we work with Park Center for Disabilities, and we take out special needs kids at our Old Salts Special Kids event once a year. And a lot of them, they love to come to the event, but not every single one of them is in the position physically where they can get on a boat and enjoy fishing. They like to be in a have their feet on solid ground, if you will. Well, what the fishing piers do is they allow for that to be possible for these folks and for the disabled. And so that's why we always take a very strong approach when it comes to whether it be, we had a pelican organization that was just nasty. And we love conservation, and we work with all kinds of ornithological societies to help seabirds. But when it gets to the point where it just seems as if it's a cash grab and they're giving misinformation and using the news media to spin a false narrative, it hurts the fishery and it hurts the stakeholders. And a lot of times it's those stakeholders that are the most vulnerable, whether it be physically or socioeconomically. And so that's one thing that we've really tried to advocate for, is to make sure that things are not overregulated, because once overregulation begins, it becomes very difficult to scrape that back, if you will. So I hope that answers
Well, with
your
the shark
question,
fishing, the
Saxon.
last thing I'll say is with the shark fishing situation is the commercial market for shark has basically been completely demolished. It no longer exists commercially, and so people aren't into it commercially anymore. It's just basically, it's no longer thought of. And so that's one of the problems that we run into is, when you do that type of regulation and you destroy that, that part of the economy and everything like that, like you said, you can never scrape it back. It never comes back. So, because there needs to be some some commercial shark fishing in order to manage the populations that we have.
Well, thanks for answering, guys. I appreciate that.
We could go on for another hour.
I know,
if you guys
right?
got it.
And so
Yeah.
we can't, and so but
Wish
really
we
quick,
could, yeah.
last question, all three of you, same question, and it's a very common fishing question. What is either your biggest or your most memorable catch? Start with you, Zach.
I'm not sure I should say this because I know if my parents are watching this, it's probably fresher in their minds of me going out on smaller boats than I should have years ago. I was on a lot of you may be familiar with a model of a boat called a Hughes, and it was a Hughes bone fisher that was 18 foot overall length, and I was taking it farther in the Gulf than I probably should have on numerous occasions. Now, one thing I will say, it doesn't really help my stupidity in that time, but I absolutely did have a Garmin InReach device on me, which gave me the ability to have not only SOS, but satellite communication capabilities, which if something were to happen, you're able to actually have a chance. And otherwise, I would never recommend anyone reproduce this please don't try this at home type of moment. But my most memorable fish would be a 60 to 65 pound wahoo that I sight casted 42 miles in the Gulf on a very calm day. I was bottom fishing for grouper and snapper, and I was anchored up, and I was in an area where usually you'll have a barracuda that'll come up with your anchor line and sit under the boat. A lot of you experienced that before. And I had a bunch of bait that didn't make it in the bottom of the live well, and I wanted to make room for the living bait, so I was just throwing all these threadfin herring out, and it was a beautiful glass calm day. You could go as far as your fuel would take you, and didn't matter how big the boat was. And so I noticed this fish that was coming around, and it was eating each of these individual baits, and the way that it was doing that, I was like, this does not look like a barracuda. This is really weird. So I realized what it was, and I ended up reeling my grouper rig up. I cut it off directly to the braided line. I don't know what I was thinking. I tied on a piece of steel leader, and we're not talking. You go to like Angler 360 or something, and you get like a nice pre-made rig. No, we're talking. This is like the stuff you'd see at Kmart. In fact, I think when they went out of business, I bought a bunch of them back in the day. If that ages this at all, but this fish, I pitched a nice lively bait, threw it out there. It hit 2 good runs. I got it to the boat. I gaffed it myself, drug it in over the gunnels. I'm staring at this thing. I did not know what to do because I didn't have room for it. I had a cooler with grouper and snapper in it. This freaking fish is as long as the beam of the boat, and I ended up dumping everything into a hatch. I ran home, and to this day, I would say that's not only my favorite catch, but it's certainly one of the most memorable, and I love the opportunity to share that, so thank you.
Yeah.
Gray?
Saxon, why don't you go ahead?
All right, sure. Yeah, happy to. So, couple fish stand out to mind, sure. The biggest fish I've ever brought to hand is a 40-pound king salmon that I landed on a fly rod in Alaska a couple years ago. That was probably the biggest, but I will say it's not the most memorable. probably at least, I told the story earlier about that 180-pound tarpon bumping my fly. That will always live in my mind. Seeing a fish as big as me, like I said, literally target a fly that's literally 2 inches long and be within 30 feet of me, I was scared. Like it's amazing to see that fish up close and personal, and just how big they get, and also the power that they have. So that was pretty special. Probably my most memorable catch actually goes back to the year 2000, believe it or not. So this was a year my dad's side of the family, the Grahams, had a family reunion out in Jackson, Wyoming. And so that was really like the first main adventure I ever took out west for fishing. And so one of the days where we didn't have any reunion-related activities, my dad took me to a very famous small creek in the Jackson area called Fish Creek, because of course it is. But so we went, and there was one part of the creek where two bends, basically, or two sections of the creek come together. And it's a very famous creek. Unfortunately, about 15 years ago, it was on private land, but the landowner allowed us to fish, and then he took that away about 15 years ago for a bunch of different reasons. So unfortunately, it can't be fished right now. But anyway, so me at 9 years old, handling a 2-weight, which, if you understand fly fishing at all, 2-weight is one of the lightest pieces of tackle you can have. And so me, my dad, and us in this creek, and I landed at the time, for a very long time, actually, it was my biggest fish. It was an 18-inch cutthroat trout, which is a couple pounds. Now, size that's big for a trout. It's obviously not big for a lot of fish around here, but the picture that I have that my dad took of me, and I have, the old-timey fly fishing vest on. I had this big eating grin. I was a lot better looking at the time, too, frankly, being 9 years old. But that was like the first main memory I have of fly fishing and why I fell in love with it. And on a side note, that's actually my LinkedIn profile picture if you ever want to take a look at that. So, so I would say for me, just that's where I truly caught the bug, in my opinion, and I've been doing it ever since.
So I did talk about a 12-pound largemouth bass, and I'd say that was probably...
You ate.
Yeah, that we ate, yes. It was harvested legally, ethically. But I've been fortunate. I've fished a lot of areas. I've gone to Costa Rica, and we've caught 30 sailfish in a day, and I've done things like that where all the mahi were 30 pounds plus, and things like that. So, but I had a experience here with a cobia that was probably about 65 pounds, and it was not. I wasn't prepared for the fish. I had all the bait that I ever wanted, and he came up to the boat it looked like a bull shark. And from there, he ate immediately. There was no, cobia. If you see one, they're going to eat usually. They're not discerning. But I didn't have a gaff on board, so I fought this fish for a long time, and we were trying to figure out what to do with it, like if we're going to tail rope it or something. I don't know if I would have dove in the water with it. Luckily, I was fishing with, around an area that other people were fishing, and these guys came over and commented on how large the cobia was, and I mentioned that I don't have a gaff, and they were like, well, what's wrong with you, man? Like, why would you not have a gaff? And I was like, I don't know. So they threw a gaff onto the boat for me, and I was able to get the fish. But it was, it was a really big cobia, and I'm really glad that I was able to be helped out by a fellow angler, that was able to toss me a gaff, because otherwise I would have never got him. I don't know what I would have done. I'm sure there's a solution there. I just didn't have to get to it. But yeah, so I'd say that was, overcoming something, on the water, kind of was what I really enjoyed about that situation.
Well, great. Well, thank you all so much for coming here to the History Center and sharing your stories and your expertise. Thank you all so much for coming and listening, and we appreciate it, and we'll see you all soon.